where all would end well. He had not the faith of Yellow Bird's people. He was not superstitious enough to believe fully in her sorcery, except that he seized upon it as a drowning man might grip at a floating seaweed. Yet was the undercurrent of hope so persistent that at times it was near faith. Up to this hour Yellow Bird's sorcery had brought him nothing but the truth. For him she had conjured the spirits of her people, and these spirits, speaking through Yellow Bird's lips, had saved him from Cassidy at the fishing camp, and had performed the miracle on the shore of Wollaston, and had predicted the salvation that had come to him out on the Barren. And so, was it not conceivable that the other would also come true? But these visions came to him only in flashes. As he traveled through the hours, the one vital desire of his being was to bring himself physically into the presence of Nada, to feel the wild joy of her in his arms once more, the crush of her lips to his, the caress of her hands in their old sweet way at his face, and to hear her voice, the girl's voice with the woman's soul behind it, crying out its undying love, as he had last heard it that night in the missioner's cabin many months ago. After this had happened, then, if fate decreed it so, all other things might end. Breault, the ferret, might come. Or Porter. Or that somebody else who was always on his trail. If the game finished thus, he would be satisfied. When he stopped to make a pot of black tea and warm a snack to eat, Jolly Roger tried to explain this new meaning of life to Peter. "The big thing we must do is to get there safely," he said, already beginning to make plans in the back of his head. And then he went on, building up his fabric of new hope before Peter, while he crunched his luncheon of toasted bannock and fat bacon. There was something joyous and definite in his voice, which entered into Peter's blood and body. There was even a note of excitement in it, and Peter's whiskers bristled with fresh courage, and his eyes gleamed and his tail thumped the snow comprehendingly. It was like having a master come back to him from the dead. And Jolly Roger even laughed, softly, under his breath. "This is February," he said. "We ought to make it late in March. I mean Cragg's Ridge, Pied Bot." After that they went on, traveling hard to reach their cabin before the darkness of night, which would drop upon them like a thick blanket at 4 o'clock. In these last hours there pressed even more heavily upon Jolly Roger that growing realization of the vastness and emptiness of the world. It was as if blindness had dropped from his eyes, and he saw the naked truth at last. Out of this world everything had emptied itself until it held only Nada. Only she counted. Only she held out her arms to him, entreating him to keep for her that life in his body which meant so little in all other ways. He thought of one of the little worn books which he carried in his shoulder pack, Jeanne d'Arc. As she had fought, with the guidance of God, so he believed the blue-eyed girl down at Cragg's Ridge was fighting for him, and had sent her spirit out in quest of him. And he was going back to her. Going. The last word, as it came from his lips, meant that nothing would stop them. He almost shouted it, and Peter answered. In spite of their effort, darkness closed in on them. With the first dusk of this night there came sudden lulls in which the blizzard seemed to have exhausted itself. Jolly Roger read the signs. By tomorrow there would be no storm, and Breault the ferret would be on the trail again, along with Porter and Tavish. It was his old craft, his old cunning, that urged him to go on. Strangely, he prayed for the blizzard not to give up the ghost. Something must be accomplished before its fury was spent, and he was glad when after each lull he heard again the moaning and screeching of it over the open spaces, and the slashing together of spruce tops where there was cover. In a chaos of gloom they came to the low ridge which reached across an open swamp of tundra to the finger of shelter where the cabin was built. An hour later they were at its door. Jolly Roger opened it and staggered in. For a space he stood leaning against the wall while his lungs drank in the warmer air. The intake of his breath made a whistling sound, and he was surprised to find himself so near exhaustion. He heard the thud of Peter's body as it collapsed to the floor. "Tired, Pied-Bot?" It was difficult for his storm-beaten lips to speak the words. Peter thumped his tail. The rat-tap-tap of it came in one of those lulls of the storm which Jolly Roger had begun to dread. "I hope it keeps up another 2 hours," he said, wetting his lips to take the stiffness out of them. "If it doesn't—" He was thinking of Breault as he drew off his mittens and fumbled for a match. It was Breault he feared. The ferret would find his cabin and his trail if the storm died out too soon. He lighted the tin lamp on his table, and after that, assured that wastefulness would cost him nothing now, he set 2 bear drip candles going, one at each end of the cabin. The illumination filled the single room. There was little for it to reveal, the table he had made, a chair, a battered little sheet-iron stove, and the humped-up blanket in his bunk, under which he had stored the remainder of his possessions. Back of the stove was a pile of dry wood, and in another 5 minutes the roar of flames in the chimney mingled with the fresh bluster of the wind outside. Defying the exhaustion of limbs and body, Jolly Roger kept steadily at work. He threw off his heavier garments as the freezing atmosphere of the room became warmer, and prepared for a feast. "We'll call it Christmas, and have everything we've got, Pied-Bot. We'll cook a quart of prunes instead of 6. No use stinting ourselves tonight." Even Peter was amazed at the prodigality of his master. An hour later they ate, and McKay drank a quart of hot coffee before he was done. Half of his fatigue was gone, and he sat back for a few minutes to finish off with a luxury of his pipe. Peter, gorged with caribou meat, stretched himself out to sleep. But his eyes did not close. His master puzzled him. For after a little Jolly Roger put on his heavy coat and parkee and pocketed his pipe. After that he slipped the straps of his pack over head and shoulders, and then, even more to Peter's bewilderment, emptied a quart bottle of kerosene over the pile of dry wood behind the hot stove. To this he touched a lighted match. His next movement drew from Peter a startled yelp. With a single thrust of his foot he sent the stove crashing into the middle of the floor. Half an hour later, when Peter and Jolly Roger looked back from the crest of the ridge, a red pillar of flame lighted up the gloomy chaos of the unpeopled world they were leaving behind them. The wind was driving fiercely from the Barren, and with it came stinging volleys of the fine drift snow. In the teeth of it, Roger McKay stared back. "It's a good fire," he mumbled in his hood. "Half an hour, and it will be out. There'll be nothing for Breault to find if this wind keeps up another 2 hours, nothing but drift snow, with no sign of trail or cabin." He struck out, leaving the shelter of the ridge. Straight south he went, keeping always in the open spaces where the wind-swept drift covered his snowshoe trail almost as soon as it was made. Darkness did not trouble him now. The open Barren was ahead, miles of it, while only a little to the westward was the shelter of timber. Twice he blundered to the edge of this timber, but quickly set his course again in the open with the wind always quartering at his back. He could only guess how long he kept on. The time came when he began to count the swing of his snowshoes, measuring off half a mile, or a mile, and then beginning over again, until at last the achievement of 500 steps seemed to take an immeasurable length of time and great effort. Like the ache of a tooth came the first warning of snowshoe cramp in his legs. In the black night he grinned. He knew what it meant, a warning